Welcome to Paranormal M, the channel dedicated to the supernatural and the mysterious. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest ghostly stories. Enjoy the thrill of the unknown. The Anniversary Clock. I was 10 years old watching TV with my older sister. They were in their early 20s. They would often babysit me while our mom was out of the house. It was just another benign evening with a small anniversary clock. Clock about 12 inches tall, all encased in glass with a small brass fixture at the bottom. Caught our attention. The clock had been in our family for years, and as long as I could remember, it never worked. The clock stayed on top of the TV as more of a decorative piece than anything, as were a number of other things, as this was in the 80s where big boxy TVs took up large spaces in living rooms. Anyway, my sister and I were watching TV. That's when suddenly we both noticed simultaneously that the hands on the clock started moving. Slowly at first, but accelerating quickly until it was too hard to make out which hand was which. After about a minute watching the hands spin, bringing the clock back to life for the first time in decades, the hands came to a jolting stop. My sister, being the brave adult she was, examined the clock and found no batteries inside. It wasn't plugged in or anything, and both of us were totally mystified at what we both experienced. When our mom returned later that evening, we told her everything. We were met with some skepticism, as one might expect, not to see it themselves. The next day, my mother received a phone call from a distant relative. The call was to inform us that our great-grand-aunt, one that had been really close with my sister early in her childhood, had passed away the day before after a short illness. Saddened by the news, we couldn't help but link the passing to the abnormal experience the night before. We asked her mother what time our aunt had passed the day before, and she said 5:30 a.m. We raced over to the clock where there, clear as day, the hands stopped at exactly 5:30. In another circumstantial twist of fate, 15 years later I'd end up meeting my future wife on May 30th, 2005. Or 5:30. Ended up getting married on May 30th, 2009, or 5:30. Familial haunting in the Deep South. To preface, I'm an incredibly skeptical person. I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal. But there is one event in my life that presents a genuine conflict to me of what's real and what's not. I grew up in our generational home. My grandparents built it, raised my father there and his siblings, and eventually my parents ended up owning the house. We moved there when I was about 6. It's a very calm and beautiful area, but steeped in a lot of dark history. The house is a short walk from an island that was a fortification for a militia that fought in the siege of Savannah. You can walk there and see the bunkers, find cannonballs, and plenty of Indian pottery. Most of the area was used for training. Also had plenty of plantations. You can dig around in the backyard and find bullets and other relics. Because so much happened there, you can feel a palpable weight in the air. It's a unique energy, you could say. It's like feeling like you're somewhere sacred. I don't know how to explain it correctly. However, I adored growing up here. I always felt comfortable. It's the one place I can go to relax and feel at home. The house itself is a 2-story ranch-style building. My bedroom was upstairs along with my sister's. My entire childhood I was obsessed with technology and video games. On my 10th birthday I was gifted a PS2 from my uncle. I was overjoyed and we set it up a room across my bedroom, the exercise room. That's because my dad had set up a home gym in there. Needless to say, I spent the majority of my time in there playing video games doing what I love. Now here's the thing. In the back of the room there's a large closet with heavy wooden doors. They slide open from the middle. I never really considered myself to be a sensitive or anything of that nature, but the closet gave me the absolute creeps. I always felt like something was watching me from that closet. I had nightmares about the closet opening. I would close the room when I went to bed because I hated looking into its darkness at night. I kept all this to myself, never expressed my discomfort. But it all came to a head during a sleepover with my cousins. We decided to bunk on a mattress in the exercise room and all sleep together. I ended up on the side of the bed directly next to the closet. I was likely 11 or 12 at the time. As I tried to sleep, I experienced actual terror. A true fight-or-flight response just by being next to the closet. To this day, I've never felt so terrified. It was like pure energy, feeling like this thing was coming from the closet. It was overwhelming me. I started crying. I explained what I was feeling. They sympathized with me and let me sleep away from that closet. I eventually got to sleep, but that feeling has stuck with me for more than a decade. Well, that's cool and all, but being a child is an incredibly trippy experience. I wrote it off as me letting my fear take over. Never forgot about it, but I never brought it up again. Most importantly to the story, I never told my dad. He's always been a no-bullshit kind of guy when it comes to the paranormal. He had never in my life talked to me about any experiences that he's had, until I was much older. And when I moved out and when I was married in my 20s. But one night at dinner, he opened up about his own unexplainable experience. Come to find out, the exercise room was his bedroom when he was growing up there. He hated it as well. The same feeling of being watched, pure dread, of overwhelming uncomfortability just being in its presence. Remember, I never told him of my experience, so I was amazed he was corroborating my own feelings. Then he explained something that I never thought would ever come out of his mouth, considering how much he is a skeptic himself. One night he was attempting to sleep, felt that familiar feeling, grew stronger and stronger. It was until the closet forcefully threw itself open in front of him, ran out of the room in absolute terror. The fact that we both had a similar experience with something of this nature without ever directly communicating about it, having corroborating stories, is to this day the one thing I'll never be able to explain. I genuinely cannot come up with any theory other than it's something we simply do not understand. No, it's not a scary story, but it's one that'll stick in my mind forever. I remain a skeptic, but there's nothing I can do to refute what happened to us. The Witch of Fort Benning Land Nav. So I went through the 22 weeks infantry OSUT, and the worst experience I had was the individual night land nav. I was in the middle of the swamp around 2 a.m. looking at my map. Suddenly, every hair in my body stood on end. My red light flickers. I turn it off and start looking around when I spot the silhouette of a woman in what I can only describe as a pioneer's outfit. Looked away for a second, looked back. Nothing. Told myself that I was seeing shit. Picked a direction I thought was good and started walking. I start hearing the crunching and breaking of leaves. They're in rhythm with the steps behind me, as if somebody was matching my pace. My hair stood up again. I stopped and looked behind me. Nothing. I continued walking. Same thing happened. Looked again, nothing. I decided that 3 points was plenty for tonight and started booking it. As I'm running, I clearly hear and I see something jumping from tree to tree. It's keeping pace as I cut through the woods, sprinting full speed. I'm not the fastest, but at the time I had a 13:45 and I have a 5-second at 40 yards. Nothing could have moved that quickly through those trees. I make it to the starting point, turn in my shit, sit on my gear. Another guy comes running in about 15 minutes later. We still have 2 hours left at this point, so it makes no sense why he would be in a hurry. He does his shit, sit next to me. He turns to me. "Dude, did you have a point in the swamp?" I gestured my boots and pants. Yeah, can't you tell? Yes, sorry, but anyway, did you see a woman in a pioneer outfit? Yeah. I was writing down my points info and my lights started flickering and I heard something in the tree above me. I looked up and saw her sitting up in a tree above the point, just staring down at me with lifeless eyes and an empty face. I ran faster than I ever have. Didn't stop till I got here. It's at this point where the guy sitting behind us leans forward. You all saw her too. We nod. Started walking into the swamp when I saw her sit up out of the water, slowly turned to look at me. I froze and I only broke out of it when the lieutenant walked up behind me and asked what I was looking at. I looked at him and pointed, but when I did, she was gone. No noise, nothing. This kid was an honest dude, and I could tell by the look in his eyes that he wasn't fucking with us. I want to know if anybody else has had an experience with the same entity. Wife and I saw our friend's mother's creepy doppelganger. Just about 15 or 20 minutes ago, at the time of typing this, my wife and I are leaving our friend's house. That's when we saw what we thought was our friend's mother twisting and making unnatural body movements. She was wearing the same clothes we saw her wearing less than an hour before, had the same hair dye, and looked almost exactly the same in the face, but something was uncanny. As we approached the awkward inhuman movements, they stopped. They took a fight stance and froze still with a look on their face both filled with hate and completely emotionless at the same time. I almost rolled my window down and said something to them thinking that it was her. That was right before I realized something was off. They stared at us. I said hesitantly to my wife, "That's Wendy, our friend's mom." My wife replied with, "No, that's not Wendy." We were both unsure and couldn't decide if it was her or not. It looked exactly like her, but something was off. We couldn't put our finger on it. For about 10 or so seconds, we all sat frozen. It felt as if, they were in the car with us. We've tinted windows, but they were looking right at us. Didn't even break eye contact. It was very intense, very uneasy. My wife and I both experienced it. I realize I can drive away, and I do so. By the time I get to the next stop sign, half a block down the road, I look in the rearview mirror. I see that they're now walking toward our car due south where we first encountered them. They were heading due north. Seeing them in my rearview mirror heading toward the car, I quickly turned the corner and took off. Called a friend and asked him if he would check on his mother. He misunderstood his mother and he just went and checked to make sure that none of the cars of the house had been broken into. So you know that it wasn't her out there. This all takes place about 4 blocks from my friend's house, about 12:30 a.m. Ask Reddit. Many years ago, I had a Ford Escort. I really loved it. One day I noticed the back right wheel was missing a single lug nut. No biggie. Replaced. Soon, though, one is missing on the same wheel. I assume the thread is stripped, but the shiny new lug nut is still there. Different one is missing. This keeps happening, and I assume all the threads are stripped at least a little bit. I don't want to lose a wheel, though, so I get all the new studs and go through the pain of driving the old ones out. Way harder than I thought it would be. Get all the new lug nuts to go with it, and before the week's out, I'm down 1 lug nut. I start checking my car every night and then again in the morning. Yep, disappearing overnight. Not on the ground either. Aha, I've got a prankster. Feeling this is annoying, but no big deal. It's a very small town. I go sell some blood plasma a few times and then buy a big old bag of lug nuts. They keep vanishing. I keep replacing them. That's an interesting way to buy tools. But then I notice one vanishes sometime after leaving for work. And before I got home, fallen off while driving, I guess. Weird. Coincidence? Well, they're still occasionally vanishing overnight about once a week randomly. I start making marks in my own owner's manual. The morning before I leave and I arrive at work, when I leave for work, when I get home. I check their tension frequently. Occasionally one is loose, and this fits the random falling off but doesn't explain overnight disappearance. Sometimes it vanishes while I'm driving, sometimes overnight. At least twice while in the parking lot at work. I'm beginning to feel very weird about it. It just doesn't add up. I keep writing stuff down as if that'll make it make sense. I carve symbols into the lug nut tops with a screwdriver to tell them apart, like a hard spade diamond in the club. It's definitely different ones vanishing. Not always the same location. Can't explain it. Finally, I try a dangerous experiment. Simply let it run down with 3/4 lug nuts. Cautiously at first, checking tension on the 3 remaining ones because I imagine the wheel falling off at highway speeds, but over time, nothing happens. Kept the car almost 2 full years after that. That back right wheel always just ran with 3 lug nuts. The only time I had one disappear was when I got new tires and the shop put a new one on. Once it vanished, though, I let things be and it was always fine. Still no idea what the fuck that was. I don't know how disturbing it was, really. But definitely so odd. I'm now curious what should have happened if I had the same kind of surveillance footage of the car at night. The house I grew up in is haunting me still. When I was a little girl, my parents bought the house that belonged to my dad's grandparents. Not sure how long the home was in my family. I do know my grandma lived there as a little girl. I'm going to write some of my experiences in this house at different times, years, and so on. As a note, we do not own this house anymore. My parents lost it when I was entering middle school, a long time ago. When I was a tiny little girl, I slept over my aunt's house for the night, and my brother went to his uncle's house. The only people in the house were my mom and dad. My mom tells me that they were in their room at night next to a door that had a staircase that went to a bedroom upstairs. They said that they had heard my voice calling, "Mom, Mom, Mom," upstairs. And then on the staircase, they both recalled the same thing, hearing my voice. I wasn't at home. So I went outside the house, looked for the neighbor's kids, but it was night, so no one was outside. The family next to us was a different country, or rather from one. Didn't call their mother's traditional mom as well, and they knew that. I was going through puberty in this house, so I was already losing my mind as a kid, but I recall some very concerning moments in my young life there. I lived upstairs in that room, and I was going through it as one does, but I was only 9 and thought about putting something on my neck and floating, if you catch what I mean. I tried, but luckily I was immature. The upstairs had a staircase and it was open with a white wooden balcony around it, so you could look down. That room still gives me the creeps. When I was younger, my aunt's boyfriend's brother died on train tracks a couple of miles from the house. You could hear that train come through at night. The night I slept in the living room and woke up at dawn standing on my tiptoes looking out a window that was next to the fireplace at the sky. At this time of morning, the sun was coming up. There were still stars out. I could hear a train. When I woke up later, my mom had to tell us he died. Think about it a lot. I was just in my upstairs room and we had it split down the middle. My sister's crib was by the stairs and I was by the other side of the room. We split it off by our closet. My little couch I got from the garage sale. You couldn't see the closet doors from my bed and the back of it. I was texting on my little flip phone and the towel flew and hit the wall. I was so scared I couldn't move. I refused to be in that room anymore. I decided to move into the basement of the house when I was in 6th grade. I had a folding cot and an old TV and used to be like in my own space. I suffered from sleep paralysis every night. I felt watched, uneasy, and sick. My mom told me my grandpa built the basement out. Not sure about the basement. It wasn't a good place to be. We all heard footsteps down there multiple times, shutting doors, running in the basement. And unfortunately, it was the most scary. Before we moved out, I took a school photo of myself, hidden in the baseboards of the stairs of the scary upstairs room. Doubt it's still there. I heard the new owners gutted it years ago. Apparently they flipped it. So here's my dilemma. I've been having nightmares about this house since we moved out years and years ago. We moved out before I went to middle school, and I'm in my 30s now. It's been a hot minute that I've been in that house. My dreams are always supernatural. They're always about me in the house as an adult. The most recent dream was about a demonic spirit, telling me I needed to paint a picture of the window with green ivy around it. The upstairs room's window next to my bed. The wall outside was covered in ivy. Completely took the house on that side. Told me I needed to paint myself at the window. Told my husband this, and he said absolutely not. Sounds like a trap and some conjuring shit. I agree, but I really feel like I should paint it. I'm not sure why I feel so inclined to do it. The house has been haunting me since ever. We all had supernatural experiences there. Even my grandma as a little girl. Something in the woods. This happened around March of 2020 or 21. I believe I was 17 at the time. It's not that long ago. One of my friends was visiting from out of town. We had gotten really into airsoft. Anyway, the neighborhood I lived in at the time had a large area of underdeveloped land. It's just up the street. It was full of pine trees and whatever, and was a few miles long and wide. We used to play airsoft up there all the time. We just called it the woods, in quotes. So me and my friend, we'll call him Christian, we devised a plan to invite a large group of my high school friends to the woods and play hide and seek. The only catch was me and Christian were going to dress up in camo and ghillie suits, shoot our friends with airsoft guns just to screw around with them. So me and Christian got dressed up. He was wearing a tan ghillie suit, mask and all. I was wearing camo and black mask and a weird mesh tan camo sheet tied around me like a poncho. We ended up finding a ditch in the woods close to the edge of the neighborhood. Set up our first spot. Our plan was to move from spot to spot throughout the night. That was while avoiding my group of friends. By the time we were prepared, it was around 6 p.m. The sun was beginning to set. We waited about 30 minutes and kept hearing branches snapping and pine cones falling and footsteps. We chalked it up to wood noises at that time, but we waited until maybe 7. Then we got the text that the group of guys had arrived and were ready to look for us. For instance, they had no idea we were wearing camo at all. So we sent some stupid cryptic text back like, "Come and find us, we can see you," among other things like that. We began hearing the guys running around and hitting our first spot. This continued for a while, but as time progressed, my friends were starting to get really close to us while we were looking. So we decided to move to our second spot. Got up and moved spots. The way the woods were set up was north and south. The woods was about 5 miles of just trees, where east was about 4 miles. West was only about a couple hundred yards. The west side also faced a main highway next to my neighborhood, so me and Christian walked to the west side and then the south into the woods. We were hugging the perimeter of the trees. We walked for some time, keeping an eye on my friends, who had no idea where we were. We ended up coming up in this super deep trench in the back of the woods. We peered in and saw it was about 15 feet down, pretty steep. So we slid into the trench and waited at the bottom. After a few minutes, it was pitch black. Christian ended up realizing he left his glasses at our first spot. He'd taken them off to wear his ghillie suit mask, and well, he said he was quickly running back and grabbing them. Then immediately he would come back. I was obviously kind of hesitant, but I agreed and he took off. I waited probably 15 minutes. Started hearing some commotion. Could hear my friend saying something along the lines of, "I saw someone, they're running. How are they so fast?" I figured Christian had promptly gotten caught, so I was getting ready to give up. That was until I suddenly heard someone baseball slide into the trench on the opposite side of me. Keep in mind, this trench was about 15 feet deep and 45 feet long, so I couldn't see the other side without walking over. I assumed Christian had slid in and escaped my friends because I heard them running somewhere else. Started calling out to Christian. I didn't get a response. End up getting a little bit annoyed and said something like, "What the fuck are you doing?" As soon as I said that, a stick flew out of the darkness, landed right in front of me. I was pretty confused. I kept calling out for Christian. That was until I heard whatever was on the other side of the trench started moving. I heard leaves rustling and what sounded like someone's knee pop or something. Paused and stopped talking. Waited a few more seconds and whatever was on the other side started taking very deliberate and very heavy steps. Slow and heavy. Figured it was one of my friends trying to freak me out, so I took one of the airsoft guns we brought and switched it to full auto. Fired a few bursts into the darkness, figuring whoever or whatever it was would yell or something. But the steps just kept coming. At this point, I was more confused than afraid, so I grabbed my stuff, climbed out of the trench. I once again ran to the western perimeter of the first and eventually got caught by all the guys. Laughed about it for a while, but one of my friends ended up asking me, "How did you change so fast?" I was obviously confused, and I asked him what he meant. He explained that him and the group saw somebody who's really skinny and tall running around the woods. I'm 6'1", was probably 175 at the time. They all kind of gave me a weird look when I told them I had been wearing the camo and poncho all night. I ignored it and went to find Christian. I walked a ways and found him shining a small flashlight in the direction of the trench I was in prior. He jumped when I walked up to him and said, "What the fuck?" Apologized for scaring him, but he stopped me. "How did you get over here so quickly?" Once again asked what he meant. He said that he saw someone peering from behind a tree just behind the trench, literally while I was in the process of getting caught. My heart sank a little bit, but we assumed somebody from the group was messing with us. We ended up meeting the group and did a roll call, but everybody that was invited was there. Christian and I started explaining what we had seen. The entire group explained that they saw a really tall and skinny silhouette sprinting around the woods. They assumed it was me due to the build. We ended up walking to the tree where Christian was silhouette, and he pointed to where the head and shoulders of the silhouette were behind the tree. But the spot where the head was probably 8 feet off the ground. Everybody got real quiet, decided to quickly leave the woods. It wasn't until we exited the woods and got onto the street that led to my house that Christian and I paused and looked into the woods. Waited a few seconds. Heard what sounded like the prop hunt whistle from somewhere deep in the woods. Obviously freaked out, quickly got back to my house. That's where I told my parents. It's been years since then, but I still get freaked wondering what the fuck happened. And what would have happened if I stayed in that trench longer? I've told a bunch of people this story. Everybody thinks I'm bullshitting. You guys are just gonna have to take my word for it. I kinda do. Kinda do. Story. I started when I was 14 years old. I'm now 38. There's always weird stuff happening around me, like keys gone and misplaced, heater turned on from, while I'm alone, and open cupboards and wardrobes. Kept going on like that for years. When I was 26 years old, I moved to Canada, bought my first house, and I was 29. Then it started to get more and more. Again, keys, wallet, heater, on, off, etc. On top of that, I heard footsteps sporadically. At 36, I got married. And now it gets interesting. The footsteps almost every day. At night as much as during the day. We have two, and they always looked from where the noise is and lay down belly up to get cuddles. They were enjoying themselves. One day we saw it for the first time. It was a little girl. Contacted a medium and we started investigating. We went through all kinds of methods. No success. December 2023, moved together back to Germany, and again, footsteps, keys, and other stuff gone and misplaced. Called my mom, and she came with a medium as well. Success. When I was 14 years old, my mom had a miscarriage. Turns out it's my little sister. She attached herself to my aura. We decided, my wife and I, to just keep her around. Even the medium were against it. At the end, it's my little sister. I want her to stick around. The Thing in the Forest. My story is about a scary experience I had. It was 15 years ago while exploring Canada. It made me feel like I was crazy. When I was 30, I went on a trip alone to explore the boreal forest in Canada and Alaska. I went alone to try and find myself again after going through some very stressful circumstances. That's a different story. It does have a connection to what happened during my trip. I'd planned this trip for close to a year, spent a lot of money to ensure this trip was what I wanted. It cost close to $70,000 for just over 6 months, which is actually cheap for what I wanted to do. I planned this trip to be a solo, secluded adventure, much as I could, to explore northern remote Alaska and the territories of Canada, which included a 4-week camping trip, which is where the scary story begins. I hired some of the indigenous people to help with my plans. They were very kind and offered me many options to satisfy my requests. One of the options they recommended really stood out. Didn't really allow company for the first 3 months of my trip, but the camping trip would be 100% solo. Sounded amazing, so I agreed. I would start in Point Hope, Alaska, make my way across the northern Ontario. The trip would start off by mostly dog sledding, snowmobiling other snow vehicles, and flying where it wasn't feasible to travel by land. I would mostly hunt and fish for food and create fires and cook what I caught, but I also brought plenty of survival food. This is why I agreed with the company. There were guides who knew the terrain, how to navigate through it safely. They shared some food they brought with them, like bannock and dried meats like deer, moose, and elk. We would camp out along the way and stay in yurts, sometimes even motels in small towns. They told me stories about tales from their culture passed down many generations. I ended up enjoying their company. The trip was amazing. I saw so much wildlife and scenery. It was awesome, especially the sky. I'd never really seen northern lights like this before. The crackling was something I didn't know they did. They were bright, and with how clear I saw the Milky Way, it gave me a sense of peace. I saw a pack of wolves take down a moose, eagles, owls, foxes, even polar bears, which made my guides a bit nervous, though they did have a firearm for emergencies. We laughed, had a few drinks, cooked beef, hog, and fish, and had a blast. It was an amazing experience. They guided my journey until we got to Fort Severn. That's where we would rest for the day. From there, we would part ways, and I would travel alone. This is where my trip turns into the most horrifying experience. The next morning, I gathered my things, bought a bit of food, and headed out. I planned to head deep into the Ontario Boreal Forest alone. I'd previously pinned a location deep into the forest on my GPS to travel to. I wasn't 100% sure I could make it, but that was part of the challenge. Traveled on foot for 10 hours straight during the day. Slept at night in a hammock. It wasn't easy by any means. The forest was dense and hard to tread through, but I was determined. Everything was fine for the first 2 days. Managed to cover about 20 kilometers. But on the third morning, I had an eerie feeling. That morning, some of my stuff was scattered around. I just told myself it was probably some animals trying to get at the food that was hung in the tree. But the weird thing was, I didn't hear anything during that night. It was very quiet. No noises of animals or insects. It didn't occur to me that anything was wrong. So I gathered my things, ate, and then headed out again. It started to get dark, so I decided to find a good place to sleep for the night. Once I did, I set up camp. This time, everything that wasn't essential was hung in the trees. I lit a fire, made some food, and just enjoyed the scenery as the sun set. Then once it got really dark, I heard something. It sounded like a very familiar voice of someone calling for help in a little girl's voice. Help, I'm lost. The voice almost made me cry, and it was extremely unnerving. Look around the best I could, but at that point it was pitch black. My line of sight was maybe 10 feet. I nervously called out, Sherry, are you okay? Can you see my fire? Then again I heard, help me. The voice changed a little, it was a little bit deeper. Now the hair on the back of my neck raised and a sudden sense of danger overwhelmed me. I took out my flashlight and looked around more thoroughly. That's when I saw it. a figure hunched over within the trees, arms fully stretched out to the side with its fingers spread out in an unnatural manner, eyes glowing, had an oversized mouth, open very wide and smiling. I just stood there trying to comprehend what the fuck I was seeing until his head rotated upside down. It collapsed to the ground and started crawling really fast toward me. I heard bones snapping. I don't know what I was thinking, but I heard a whisper, "Run." So I bolted. I left everything I had there except the flashlight in my hand and a bit of emergency dried food I had in my pouch. I ran as fast as I could. I didn't stop. But I heard it pursuing me, calling me, telling me to stop in what sounded like my wife's name, like voice. I kept hearing, "Please stop, I'm scared." I ran anyway. I don't know how I managed to navigate through the forest, but I did end up falling down a small hill into a wet mud pit, and I just laid there. I heard my wife calling me, Sherry asking me where I was or saying that she was scared. The cell phone ringing to my wife's tone. Weird chattering noises. A voice saying, "I'm hungry, where are you?" Growling and lots of footsteps all over the place. I was so petrified I just laid there, paralyzed with fear like I'd never felt before, and this mud pit ended up being my saving grace. That's because after what seemed like an eternity, the voices stopped. I heard the sound of morning birds. The sun began to rise. I waited until it was fully light out and crawled out of the pit. I gathered my head, checked what I had. A bit of water, a couple of bars of food, and thankfully, my GPS. Managed to navigate to a country road. Took me another 5 days staying in ditches at night along the road while this thing was trying to hunt me, taunting me with every trick it had up its sleeve. I think the mud made it lose track of me. During the day, I would navigate toward the closest town. Along the way, I'd managed to get to a highway where I saw one lone semi-truck traveling toward the town, so I flagged it down. The guy, an older gentleman driving, looked and asked if I was okay. All I said was I'd been lost for over a week straight and running from some animals. He looked at me and said, "You were lucky." The man told me a story about his brother who went hunting in these forests. He said he wouldn't talk about what happened, except that the forest was in fact haunted. Whatever his brother experienced scared him enough that he never went hunting ever again. I ended up telling him what happened. The guy's face went pale. We were silent for the rest of the ride. He drove me to Kenora. That's where he said he would let me stay at his place for the night. In the morning, his brother came by, and he and the old man talked. The old man's name was Steve. His brother's Jim. Jim looked back at me, eyes wide open. I nodded back at him. We both shared our stories. What I described was exactly what he saw. I ended up staying in Kenora. We all became pretty good friends. But Steve died about 3 months after this. He was 63. His brother and I stayed friends for about 2 years until he died from liver failure. I tried my best to get him to stop drinking, but the nightmares kept reliving that experience. I had him too, so I understood he needed an element of escape. And I too pretty much became an alcoholic. The nightmares were just too much. He was only 35 when he passed. His friendship meant a lot to me. Afterwards, about another year, I moved to Winnipeg. Tried to get my life back in order. I joined AA and I got clean. This is where I met my current friends. I told my story at the meeting. I started with, "I don't care if you think I'm crazy." And here's some backstory. Sherry was my daughter. She was 5, but got cancer and lost the battle. She died 4 months after her diagnosis. My wife couldn't take the pain and ended up hanging herself 6 months after Sherry died. It was her voice that told me to run. After their deaths, I was destroyed so much that I planned this trip not to find myself. What I really meant was I planned this trip for me to also commit suicide. I was going to hang myself deep in the forest to rot. That's how I felt inside. Run. I used my entire life savings to plan this trip because I had no intention to come back. Think back to this day many times. It made me reconsider taking my life, and I went to therapy. Still working towards coming to terms with my past, but things are much better now. I met someone I was shown in a dream 10 years ago. When I was 15, my great-grandmother died and came to visit me in my dreams the same night. It was a pretty unusual, hyper-realistic dream. She told me she wanted to grant me a gift of divine knowledge, that she'd specifically chosen to see me. I'm a lesbian, fact unknown to her at the time she died. She said I didn't have to feel guilty about my sexuality because the person I'm meant to be with in this incarnation was also born in a woman's body, and that I was on the right path. I asked if I already knew her. She said it would be a long time before we met. She was younger than me and lived in a different continent. She also said I would have many experiences before meeting her, including getting married. I indeed got married at 22, and I'm in the process of divorce right now at 25. We would find each other in another country. She then asked me if I wanted to see her and took me to a family's apartment by touching my arm. Many details about this dream that I don't want to disclose, but basically we stood there watching the family for a bit. I asked her questions about them, all of which she had the answers to. They spoke in a foreign language, and even though I could identify it as a different language I didn't speak, I couldn't understand it. I'd never seen those people in my life. The whole context around them left me so confused after that I woke up. I woke up and I convinced myself it was just a weird dream. My brain's way of coping both with my great-grandmother's death and with the guilt I was experiencing over my homosexual desire. 10 years later, I'm living in another country. I met the girl from my dream very randomly. We were working at an event last November. We both instantly experienced an unusual connection that hasn't gone away since then. I didn't recognize her at first, because she looks very different. But recently I saw a picture of her as a child with her family, and the dream came back to me in all its vivid details. I still haven't mentioned this to her, as I'm afraid of her reaction, but I feel that I must, since, in the dream, I witnessed a memory of hers, and the only way I can confirm what I saw is real is if I ask her. Does anybody have any idea how to go on about this without being creepy? Frankly, the concept of having a person that I'm destined to be with absolutely terrifies me. Don't even know what kind of advice I'm looking for, but I'm feeling quite insane. Any thoughts would be greatly appreciated. I'm also curious if any of you have experienced something similar. You gotta just ask. Something scratching my foot while trying to sleep in bed. So this happened in my childhood, and I've only ever told 2 people about this. I guess it's because it sounds so silly, I guess. When I was 8 or 9, my bedroom was pretty small. I had a bunk bed, but I always slept at the bottom bunk because at the time I thought it kept me safe from demons. My bed was situated in a way where 3 sides of the bed were against a wall. The head part sort of touched the wall, and the left of the bed touches the wall, and the foot part touched a wall, so that also had a window. If I was laying perfectly straight in bed, the window alignment was perfect with my bed. The height of the bed was in a way that my feet were just below the window. One night I woke up in the middle of the night. My feet were sticking out of the covers. I moved to get in a comfy position and try to fall back asleep. Out of nowhere, I felt something scratch the bottom of one of my feet with enough force it almost hurt. Freaked out, faced the wall to my left, and got into the fetal position with all my limbs and head under the covers. Even my head was covered with only my mouth not under the covers. I laid there for what seemed like hours. That was until I fell asleep and woke up in the morning. Told my mom what happened, and I'll never forget what she said. Oh, it was probably the cat. I wouldn't pay it any mind. I instantly told my mom that we didn't have a cat anymore, and she brushed it off and hurried me to get ready for school. Before I left for school, I checked the space in between the floor of my bed and the wall. Nothing was there, no toys, no nails or screws, and definitely not a cat. I even checked the window, but it was locked. Never happened again, but then again I never slept with my feet not covered by my blankets, even to this day. Full moon scare. I don't scare easily at all, But this night scared me to the bone. About 2 months ago was a full moon. The night was lit up like daylight as the moon was bright and full. I don't sleep easily, or really well on full moon nights. I stay up until the wee hours of the morning watching TV before lying down to sleep. In my living room there's a door to my deck and my side yard. This door has very large windows in it, about 24 by 64. There is no blind or shade in the window. I've lived in my house for 10 years now and as an adult. I've always felt safe in this house. It was my childhood home. I live smack dab in the middle of town too. My yard is privacy fenced and the rails are on the inside of my yard. So while sitting with my dog who's lying facing me watching TV, I heard a wolf howl. I know this sound. I lived with a wolf dog for 14 years. I didn't think much about it as somebody in my area could have adopted a wolf dog also. Around 2 a.m. my dog suddenly raised her head, stretched her neck as never really before, and in sort of a slow motion turned her head toward me. The look of fright on her face shocked me. I leaned forward to look at the door and I saw yellow wolf eyes looking me through the window. They were about dog eye level until whatever it was stood up. Then it disappeared. Got my .357 handgun out and held it until dawn. I've since covered that window. My sister and the one son I told this story to said that it was probably some teen trying to scare someone. I just happened to be me there instead, but I don't agree. They were not there. They didn't see my dog's reaction. What dog moves in slow motion unless they are totally freaked out? She didn't jump up and bark, and any dog would at least bark, unless it was scared and freaked out. Just because we live in town doesn't mean strange occurrences can't happen. I'll never view a full moon the same again. Who is under the house? In 1981, I moved to Fort Gibson, Oklahoma. That was with my husband and 4 small children. My children are ages 1 4-year-old, 2 3-year-old, and 1 1-year-old and 1 6-month-old. We moved into an older home with an acre yard. It was completely fenced. This included the front yard, so people had to come to the front yard, or gate rather, and ring a bell so they could come out to the gate to meet whoever was there. The house was built up on blocks, had a huge front porch. It was a beautiful piece of property. I lived there for 5 years. Here's a little history of my town that you might find interesting. Fort Gibson was called the Graveyard of the West. This was many, many years ago. It was said anywhere you walked that you'd be stepping on a grave. There's many places in this town that are said to be haunted. Back to my story. I truly loved this place and this piece of land. It felt like it was perfect fit for my family, too. That had 2 large paper-shelled pecan trees, 2 fairly large Granny Smith apple trees, and 1 sand plum tree. I loved the fact that it was large and shady. The house was totally fenced in and offered a wonderful place for my children and dog to play. The first year when the apples became fully ripe, my children would come running in with their little arms full of apples. They would ask me to bake an apple pie, and this went on all apple season. Of course, I was more than happy to bake a pie for them, so when the pecans fell, or pecans, however you want to say it, they would bring those in too, and ask for a pecan pie. One summer day, my oldest child came in with a huge bowl of strawberries that the neighbor had given him, and asked him to bake me a pie. He said, and I quote, "Mom, the people really want you to bake a pie, because it smells so good." This stunned me for a moment. I was confused by his statement. Then I kind of became worried. Our property backed up to an open field, some woods beyond that. Thought maybe someone was coming to the back fence and talking to my children. I asked my son, "What people?" Wait for it. He replied matter-of-factly, "The people that live under our house." To say the least, I was completely flabbergasted by this. I didn't really want to know, but I had to ask my child about how he knew that there were people under our house. He told me that when he and his siblings were out playing by one of the apple trees that was near our house, the people would start whispering to them to come over to the door to access under the house. They would then ask them to get me to bake a pie. I totally was beyond freaked out. Gathered up my children from outside, told them to stay inside because I thought there might be a skunk or something in their yard. I never lied to my children. But I felt that this was a justified reason to do so. Got my German Shepherd coyote dog and went to the access door that went underneath the house. So frightened, I suspected that a homeless person or people were living underneath their house. Found nothing. Nothing. I'd send my dog under the house first, and let me tell you, if someone was under there, she would have done her job. She came back wagging her tail. I crawled under the house to see if there was any sign of interloper. Empty. Just pipes and dirt. I decided to question each child separately about the people under the house. Each one told the same story. Told my husband about the quote-unquote people under the house, and he laughed and said her house or land was most likely haunted. I was asking for pie because, well, it smells good. Besides, he remarked, you make some damn good pie. Many days after that I would sit near the door, but no one ever whispered to me to bake a pie. Yet, the people under the house continued to whisper to my children I wasn't around to fetch apples or pecans to bake pies, apparently because they smelled so good. The Red Clover Field. It was 1959. I was a precious 5-year-old. My family lived on an Air Force base in southwestern Illinois. It was a beautiful summer day. The sun was shining and a soft warm breeze was blowing through the corn and red clover fields. As they say, the corn was as high as an elephant's eye, the red clover in bloom scenting the air ever so slightly. I had gotten myself and my 2 older siblings in trouble for sneaking off the base and going to the forest the day before. Thought my siblings would never play with me again. But my older sister asked me if I wanted to sneak off base and go play at the school playground. She had left something there earlier, wanted to go retrieve it. I was ecstatic. She had forgiven me. The school was only about 2 blocks down the road from one of the gates on the base. There were certain ways to sneak past the guards at the gate. Of course, we knew all of them. A large cornfield was across the road from the school. Red clover fields bordered the school on the other 3 sides. The clover field that bordered the playground came right up by it like a swing set, like 5 feet away. We got to the school playground and my sister told me that I could wait for her while I played in the swings. She said that she was sure the object she had lost was on the other side of the building. This made me nervous, but she promised to be right back. I sat on the swing and waited for her. I waited and waited and waited a long time. The sun kept getting lower in the sky. I don't know how long I sat on that swing waiting for her, but it seemed like a lifetime. The afternoon had turned to early evening. She had tricked me. She had left me there alone. Sat on a swing facing the red clover to watch the bees buzzing to and fro. Became too scared to get up and move. Wanted my sister to come and get me. Honestly, don't really know why I was afraid. I was an adventurous child. But this time I was frightened. Wanted someone to come get me. All of a sudden I saw a glow on the other side of the red clover field. It was coming toward me. Now I really froze. It mesmerized me and scared me at the same time. As the glow came closer, I could see a figure. It was a figure wrapped in a white glow walking across the field. This was on top of the clover. I squinted and kept looking across the field, and I thought my imagination had just gotten the better of me. I closed my eyes, hoping that whoever that was would go away. I thought I was scared before. I was terrified now. I was frozen to the swing seat. I didn't want to be there, and I tried to think happy thoughts. Didn't work, but I tried. I dare not move. I dare not open my eyes. Just go away, go away. Then I heard a voice, soft and gentle. The figure said, "Open your eyes and gaze upon me." I barely opened my eyes to peek at this glowing figure that was standing at the top of the red clover. The figure repeated to me to open my eyes and gaze upon it. The glowing figure said it would not hurt me. I opened my eyes and I looked. I really looked. The figure was wearing a white hooded robe and white glow that was so bright it hurt my eyes. I couldn't see a face or eyes, nose or mouth, but it had spoken to me. How was any of this possible? I was scared and I was confused. The white-robed figure spoke again. "Get up and run home. Don't look back, just run." Stunned, I couldn't fathom what was happening to me. Then in a more forceful voice, the figure said, "Run! Do not look back! Go!" That was all it took. Shot out of that swing like a scared rabbit. Ran faster than I'd ever run before. Felt like I was flying. I ran home in tears the whole way. I didn't care and ran right through the gate past the stunned guards. Ran home to my mom crying and hugging her. She asked me what happened. Told her the whole story. She told me that it was okay. She said that it was just Jesus and didn't want to get me into any trouble. Went to my room still crying, and my sister asked me what was wrong. She had a smirk while asking. I wouldn't tell her, just laid on my bed crying until I fell asleep. The next day my parents were whispering in the kitchen. Sat in the living room waiting for the boom, and I knew it was coming. This was twice in a row that I'd snuck off base. My dad came in and sat beside me. He had a very worried look. Told me that I was a very, very lucky little girl, and that I didn't understand. I wasn't in trouble. My dad said never do something like that again. Then he hugged me so tight I almost couldn't breathe. Didn't understand my parents' reaction to that event until years later. Questioned my mom about it when I was a teenager. She told me a man had been found at the cornfield and had been murdered the evening that I'd been there. Murdered at the cornfield, across from the school. Ghostly tin can strikes again. "I'm awake, just give me a moment," I say to my pup. She's insisted I wake up at 4:30 a.m. to go outside. This isn't really an unusual occurrence in my life. I usually get up at 6 a.m., but sometimes I'm rudely jolted awake by panting in my face and a paw on my shoulder. She doesn't wake me, just open the door to go outside. My pup will not go outside without me, especially after having surgery on her leg several years ago. It became the habit for her after months of having to help her walk outside. Well, anywhere for that matter. So outside we go. The darkness would envelop us if not for my tactical flashlight. No wind, no lone morning bird is singing as it usually does. So quiet it seems as if we're the only living creatures in this bustling city. Then I hear it. A can tumble over and over down the street. Heard this before on the same type of dark no-wind morning. The other time I heard the can, we were on opposite sides of the yard. Each time the can tumbling sound was close. Both times I peek over the 6-foot fence that encloses my front yard on either side of my house. And nothing. Both times, nothing. How can a can tumble by itself without a strong wind? How can a can tumble with no one kicking it? And where is the damn can? How do I hear it? Is it some ghost just doing its thing? I honestly just don't get it. And it is very creepy. Makes me feel like I'm in the series The Twilight Zone. Can't tell my sister, she already thinks I'm paranoid. She leaves doors unlocked and goes to sleep. I lock the whole house up at night. If I tell her that something strange happened to me, she just says, "You are so paranoid." So here I am telling my experience to fellow paranormal believers and some non-believers too. Have a wonderful day and blessings to all of you out there. Indeed. Unexplainable thing that happened to me. Scary thing that happened to me that I still can't make sense of to this day. I was like 10 or 11 when this happened to me. I still remember the details vividly. When I was younger, I always hung out with two of the same girls every weekend. We went skating, spent the night at each other's houses, etc. We were really close and tight. One day we decided to spend the night after skating with my friend. We went to call her Jasmine. She happened to also live near my grandma, so we decided to visit her. On the way to her complex apartment, because there were 6 buildings in a complex with like a section called A building and then B building, we saw like a teenager much older than us. They were climbing up the wall near these buildings, just extremely good at tricks. Like when talking to my Nana, she declared instantly to stay away from him. Made me promise her not to hang out with him. Later that evening at around 6:30, 7:30, where it's still like light outside but soon going to be dark, we chose to go hang out behind her complex building where there's a 7-walled-in fence with a small playground. When arriving, we saw the same teenager from earlier, but facing the woods. Of course, I'm like, "Hey, you okay?" He turned around once with kind of perfectly normal, then turned to his direction again and then back to me, and I saw him have like a deformed face or like 2 emerging ones. Then third time he was normal. My friends and I all saw it. We ran to her apartment. I know I wasn't seeing things because they saw it too. And I remember confronting him the next day. He said, "Haven't you ever heard of the 7 gates of hell?" And after that day, I never seen him again. And also our group after that was never the same. We kind of grew apart. See ya.